Let's remove the spring here. Oh, he's still on camera, that's amazing. Move this screw. This screw holds the B lever in place, but it also holds that spring, and the spring acts against the shaft on the self-timer setting lever, flash sync setting lever. Let's just get this spring off its post so that I don't lose it. That's the B lever return spring, and there's one more spring here that has to come off, which is really enthusiastic to get away. I'll just unhook that. I put a toothpick over the shaft before unhooking it so that the spring could not fly away, because otherwise, as you can well expect, they do. Okay, well, that's the top of the mechanism plate stripped from the back of the shutter. Well, there's 3 screws holding this plate in place. This plate sets the aperture. On a retina reflex camera that has its own spring on the shutter. On the Contaflex it doesn't. That action is activated in the camera body. So we've got that. Let's remove this spring. This spring's job is to snap the shutter blades down to the closed position when you release the shutter, prior to the mirror and everything flipping out of the way, and then the exposure actually happening when the blades open and close. So we can take that off, take this lever off. That sets the aperture settings. I mentioned that there were probably loose screws holding the mechanism plate into the shutter. Well, here they are. These 3 here, they're all loose. Some worse than others. They couldn't get lost because the heads of the screws were trapped underneath that plate. So they probably unscrewed as far as they were going to easily unscrew. So we've got 2 pieces here. We have the shutter case with the diaphragm blades in it. We'll see how well that diaphragm moves. Yeah, it's not very well. It's quite gummy. Here we have the shutter. Now this is the moving plate that should snap down into the closed position. Now here, let's tip those blades off. This ring here, you can see that tab. See how bent over that is? That's damaged. That'll have to be squared up, and that has probably distorted this plate to the extent that things didn't want to move smoothly. And here we have the mechanism plate and the blade actuating ring. And this is the blade actuating ring, this black part, these posts that you can see sticking up to the blade actuating ring coming through. And if I can get this to clear these little obstructions. This is just ridiculously stiff. There's no danger that shutter was going to work properly. 3 screws hold the lens tube onto the mechanism plate. The blade actuating ring is held in place by that lens tube. So here's our blade actuating ring. Let's unhook it. Now these parts I'll have to clean carefully. Once they're clean and reassembled, I can tell whether the blade actuating ring is going to move smoothly. If it doesn't move smoothly, it means that there's a problem with the plate, and almost certainly it'll be that the shutter's been crushed, as I said. This piece will certainly have to be straightened up, and hopefully I can get that working to my satisfaction. The blades themselves look pretty good. One of them, perhaps two, one of them at least has suffered some damage. Let's see if I can pick this thing up. It's hard picking things up from this mat. The stuff just floats along the surface. You can't get underneath it. Okay, so this blade here, you may be able to see by the play of light on it at this point, the edge of that blade is slightly damaged. Now that'll need to be, I'll attempt to flatten it out, but if I can't flatten it out, I'll just replace that blade. That would certainly, by itself, that would cause problems in allowing the shutter to work correctly. This part, put this mess down. Look at the shutter case. And the diaphragm blades here, let's see. Now that screw was lightly loose. That one was tight. That one was tight. So that wasn't falling to bits. Looking at the case, it's a bit filthy, nothing outstanding. Looking at this ring, it's got some dirty grease around the outside edge. That wasn't helping. This plate, of course, that looks a bit dirty, nothing too bad. And the blades themselves, they don't look too bad. They're not clean by any means, but they don't look awful. I think the stiffness here was most likely coming from this plate here, the moving plate, and it's greased. It's got grease on there. Now that grease has gone dry and sticky. It should probably not have had that grease there to start off with. It would have been much better had that been lubricated dry with a bit of graphite. I'll possibly be doing exactly that. It's got to move quite quickly, that if those diaphragm blades don't shut down to the preset aperture, you are going to end up, in the best case, with overexposed pictures. Right, well, I've got quite a bit of stuff here in front of me, and I'll start cleaning this stuff up and hopefully be able to make a good working shutter out of this. Well, here I've got all these components cleaned up. So I've removed all that sticky, oily grease and rubbish from these components. And I'm just going to lubricate this edge where it sits in the case by rubbing a soft lead pencil over it. And I'm just applying, basically all I'm doing is leaving a bit of graphite on that surface. And it's the edges I'm here mostly concerned about. That's where it was sitting in the case. And that'll do. That's all I need to do. Let's have that piece back out. I can start reassembling the diaphragm. So I start with that plate. That's got a little post on it to align it, and that post should be up at this stage. And I can put my blades in position. There are 5 blades. These have all been cleaned now. They weren't bad, they weren't particularly oily. They didn't really show much problem at all, the blades themselves. Get that blade seated correctly, and its mate. I expect that the diaphragm will work quite smoothly now. If it doesn't, then there'll be some other issue that needs to be dealt with. And there I'd be thinking about perhaps the case being crushed in slightly so that there's insufficient clearance. However, we shall see. Right, I've got to lift the early blades over the last ones that I've put in place. Like that. Then this plate goes on. It only goes on in one position. I just happen to know from experience that it goes right there. So that the tab that comes out there in exactly that position. This case goes on the top. Now that only goes on in one position. I said there's a locating post here, a little rivet. That goes into a little hole in the case there. Yep. Get a wriggle to seat it. That should be good. I don't think I've displaced anything, have I? Oh yeah, perhaps. Let's just get those blades seated in there again. That wriggling was just a little bit too much and I managed to shift one of the blades out of its position. Let's just start stacking these in again. I think my tweezers might be needing a bit of attention. They're not holding the blade as firmly as they should do. Maybe the tips are slightly bent. Alright, let's pull these blades back out of the way so I can place the last blade. That's that. Lift that blade over the top. And this control ring that opens and closes the blades, get that into position. That looks fine. What's that mark? Is that just a mark? Yeah, thought it might have been a piece of cotton, but it was just a mark. That's better. Flip this over. Remove the outside of my jig, pop that underneath to support it. And there are 3 small screws. In this shutter, they are all countersunk head screws. Flathead screws to some. I want to get them all in position, and I'm only doing them up very lightly at this point in case one of the blades is not seated correctly, in case its rivets, the pivots are not seated correctly. I don't want to just crank down on the screws and end up damaging a blade. Just checking the pivots all appear to be correct in the fixed plate here. That's moving smoothly on the other side, so I can do my 3 screws up. And check the action again. That seems smooth enough. So there doesn't appear to be any problem with that diaphragm. That appears to be good. That should snap down to the set aperture without any problems at all. That's that part, so that's our shutter case. Need to turn my attention to the mechanism plate and start cleaning this up. And as I did for the other components, it's just a case of using naphtha on a cotton bud and swabbing all the surfaces to get them clean, remove all traces of that old dried out grease. As you can see, there's plenty of it. The silvery appearance of this plate here, the black plate, that'll be graphite pretty much embedded in the surface. That won't cause any problems, that's fine. It's the medium that the graphite was suspended in, the greasy part of that is what the problem was. And it just goes sticky. It acts like glue. It just sticks stuff down. You cannot get stuff to move. And this faces against that moving plate that swings the blades in and out. On a simple shutter from a rangefinder type camera, this surface would be facing the shutter blades directly. Here it does not. Again, that's quite silvery looking, and that will be graphite. Of course, all these little levers need to swing freely. This piece here is the pallets. Now the pallets rattle backwards and forwards against the pallet wheel. That controls the speed of release of the shutter mechanism so that you get your flash sync correct. With bulb flash, because bulbs take some time to get up to speed to start burning at peak brilliance. The bulb is actually ignited early in the sequence, before the shutter blades have started moving or started getting to open position. With electronic flash, by comparison, the action takes place for all practical purposes almost instantaneously. So electronic flash, the tube is lit at the point where the blades are fully open. And having your flash sync set so that the flash contacts make at the point the blades are fully open will work for bulb flash as well, but it means you have to use a slower shutter speed, because to enable you to get the benefit of all the burning action of the bulb flash, which takes a measurable amount of time compared to electronic flash. So here I'm cleaning the lens tube now, particularly around this edge here is where the blade actuating ring runs, and that needs to be clean and clear from rubbish. That looks good. Now the blade actuating ring. This has been buttered with graphite grease, which probably worked very well when it was fresh. But as the greasy stuff was dried up over time, it just becomes sticky. With all the graphite, it's probably low friction sticky, but that doesn't help us any. So this is quite important that this piece moves smoothly. Otherwise the shutter will never run with reasonably correct speeds, even if it runs at all. And the blade actuating ring was very sticky previously. Right, let's see what we can do here. That under there. This is the detent spring, and the detent spring's job is to keep the shutter, it biases it basically. It means that it wants to stay in the fully open or the fully closed position, and it's not enthusiastic about being in between. There's 3 screws here, and one of them is longer than its mates and goes through the plate that holds the main spring in position. If you mix these up, you end up with grief because one of the screws will stick through the plate and potentially catch shutter blades and stop the shutter from working correctly. And it means that you'd end up with a short screw in this position, and since there's not much thickness to the plate, it means that you would in great danger of stripping that screw out of the mechanism plate. And you can probably guess how I learnt these things. Oh, that was something I only had to learn the error of my ways once on that score, and like one of my workmates who I'd seen him bugger up any number of mechanism plates. Right, well that looks quite good. This of course has got no lubricant in it at all at the moment, and I'm deciding now whether I should lubricate my blade actuating ring with some molybdenum paste or graphite powder. I think I'll use graphite powder in this case. The graphite powder, the advantage of the graphite powder, one of them of course is that it's dry. Because it's dry, it's not going to change its nature over time. It's also not going to attract dust and hold dust in place to become a grinding paste, which is what can happen with greases. I'll lubricate this with some graphite powder and then come back. Well, I'm very happy with the action of that mechanism plate. That's nice and smooth, no signs of stickiness. That's just ideal. So I'll pop that to one side because I need to deal with these shutter blades. And one of them is damaged, isn't it? This one here. Its mates look okay. They may benefit from a polish with a bit of brass though to improve their the surface finish. But this one, let's see if it'll flatten. Here I'm just using the tail of my tweezers and pressing down on that, the high point, the crease if you like, the high point where the blade is creased. Well, it's certainly improved a lot. I don't know whether it's improved enough. What I'm effectively endeavouring to do here is bend it back the other way. And you can be successful at that, but you're bending anything that was once upon a time flat. You're trying to make it flat again. It's tricky. Metal stretches, it just doesn't. You pull it out of shape, it doesn't want to go back where it came from. I'm looking at the blade end on here to see how flat that blade lies. That's pretty good actually. I'm sort of burnishing that with the end of my tweezers. Oh, I think that'll do. Alright, I'm going to polish these blades with some Brasso and then we'll assemble this shutter. Oh, before I get to there, I've got to do this, haven't I? I've got to deal with this plate. This plate was bent. Let's have a look at that. So it's twisted at this point. I'll use 2 pairs of pliers so I can hold it firmly here and pull that back without distorting that plate any more than I have.